Hey guys, welcome to the Good in Today podcast. I'm Danny Hoefelmann. I'm your host, and this is the podcast where I believe that no matter what's going on in your day, there is some good in it. Today I have the opportunity to interview Ashley Law. She's someone who's become a really good friend of mine. She is a public speaker. She's a mental health advocate, and she's just an awesome person. So I'd like to welcome Ashley to the show.
Thanks, Danny, for having me.
Thank you. I'm going to read kind of a one sentence bio that I wrote of you, and then I want to have you kind of fill in some of the details there.
Okay.
But I just wrote that you are a public speaker, a mental health advocate specializing in encouraging women to have self-confidence through learning to love themselves the way they are right now. Is that accurate?
It's very accurate, yes.
Awesome. Well, do you want to, for the people that don't know you, can you kind of give a little more background and context into where you've been and that kind of thing?
Absolutely. So I grew up a dancer, a competitive dancer, and I kind of got my validation through hearing when I was really talented at things and I was the best at things, and it kind of became my love language without me really recognizing that. And that pattern kind of continued, and that was how I started to feel comfortable and confident about myself. And it continued as I became an NFL cheerleader. I cheered with the Minnesota Vikings for 3 years, and that was a really fun, exciting time in my life. But during that time, I started noticing that I had some kind of unhealthy patterns, not because I was an NFL cheerleader, but just because of the tendencies and the relationship I had developed with hearing certain things and just kind of that love language I kind of mentioned. And so I ended up in treatment for 3 months. So I was in an inpatient hospital for 3 months where I lived and kind of had to learn how to love myself again. And it was through that journey, being in the hospital, living in the hospital for 3 months, and then continuing on for 2.5 years of very intensive therapy, that I learned a lot of people just don't know how to love on themselves and how to talk through their emotions or their feelings. They just kind of go throughout their day. And it's not something that's taught in school. And so I developed this deep passion and desire to help other women and other people really just learn to feel comfortable talking about certain things, whether it's categorized as good or bad, just really being comfortable talking about a wide scope of topics and emotions and all different kinds of people about it.
Okay, so one place I want to go with it is basically I want to make sure that all the themes of all these episodes with you and everyone to come is one of the biggest things to me is not just to put awareness on these hard things that you've been through, but once we've talked about kind of where you've been, always giving action steps to how did you actually get to where you are now? Because I would love for the focus to always just go back to, this isn't a sad story. I actually looked at your blog and I scrolled way back, and one of the things that stood out to me was basically you said this is not a sad story. This is a sad part to the story. And even Disney movies, they all have sad parts. That's what makes the story good. And I think that's really the biggest thing. That's the thing I want to get from this. And that's what I want to get from our conversation. So one of the reasons that I admire you, and it's kind of little background, I met Ashley when we were doing a podcast. We had partnered with Red Bull, and she was friends with Jessica Bowie, who was the lady at Red Bull. And we had no clue who she was. They were just hey, there's another lady that's going to show up, so interview her too. And that was on our other show, the Skylar Irvine show. Skylar is the CEO. We're in Renzer Media Studios right now. And basically, you know how you just meet some people and you're there's something about them. At some point, somehow I know I'm going to cross paths with that person again. You were one of those people for me. And I think we talked that day, and I kind of learned what you were doing. And for me, I think I even told you, is I want to start speaking on mental health. I want to start, eventually a nonprofit. I want to do these different things.
I remember you saying that to me.
And you were I want you to just do it. Go to Toastmasters, go do these things. Still, I've gone to Toastmasters twice, but my speaking, I'm hoping, is just going to come through this, and we'll just see where it goes. It's not going to be super crisp, but I don't think that's my goal, honestly. I think the reason that I can resonate with people is because I'm so much of an average person that it lets people see that you don't have to be polished to put these conversations out there. And anyway, I knew eventually you'd come back around, And then we needed to have a new host for one of our shows here. We do Why Arizona. And we were like, well, who do we know? And I knew you were a speaker. I knew you, selfishly, I just wanted to connect with you again. And I was like, well, let's have Ashley do it. And you came in, and you've been the host on one of our podcasts called Why Arizona for this entire season. And it's all been women's empowerment and essentially like ways to love yourself and ways to slow down and basically just do things that are self-care for you. And it's been fun because on my end, I'm going through a lot, basically figuring out my own, figuring out like my own beliefs, spirituality, learning to find ways to, be more in touch with like what are my feelings and things like that. So even though it was like a women's empowerment, I don't know, 3-4 months that we've been going now, everyone's talking about feelings, and like it just freaking resonates with me right now because that's something that I've never navigated in my life, and it's something that I was lucky enough to basically sit in on, 15 to 20 episodes of people just talking about going through these processes, and it's been really fun for me. One thing you and I have talked about, and I want to just kind of hear not your why for life, but you talk about hard things. You talk about eating disorders. You talk about anxiety, depression, and like recently you opened up about going through IVF and like infertility and like all these things. And most people don't see value in putting that out there, even though I feel like so many people they want to hear it. They want to know they're not alone. So for you, what was it that originally made you say like, I'm going to start putting these hard conversations out there? And like, what makes you continue to like push that message?
I'm really glad you asked that question because I'm still trying to figure out why I'm sharing some of the things. And I think that the first time I decided to put something out there, I had been very vague in the past. And the first time I put something out there was for my eating disorder recovery. And I was participating in the NEDA walk, the National Eating Disorder Awareness Walk that happens all over the country in a span of about 2 months. And they travel. And I was 5 years into recovery, and I saw that it was coming locally, and I asked my husband if he would go with me, and he said yes. And then as soon as I registered, it said, awesome, now you can create a page to tell other people that you're doing this and help raise money for awareness. And I was like, crap, like, do I post this now and ask people like if they will help me fundraise for this really important cause that has changed my life and helped me move on really with life and have a life again. And I contemplated for probably days, and finally I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm just gonna do it. And I remember like I was shaking and my heart, I could feel it beating out of my chest, and I was at work actually. Like I probably shouldn't have been posting on Facebook at this time, but
it happens
from time to time, let's be real. And I published this like little bio and a very brief 2-paragraph story of what I had been through. And so many people commented and donated. And the past couple of years, I have raised some of the top funds in Phoenix for the walk. Like I think last year I raised over $2,000.
That's awesome.
And it was just so cool because people come together and say like, wow, I know somebody, or I had no idea you ever went through this and things like that. And, taking that first leap 2 years ago, even though I had already been in recovery for 5 years, I never came out and said it. And it just kind of gave me this rush of like, wow, so many people after I posted that reached out and said, hey, I'm going through that too, or I went through that too. Like, I still kind of struggle. I'm really glad that you put that out there. It shows me I can like move on and, have a healthy relationship with maybe a spouse someday or things like that. And it just, I don't know, like it made me feel good being able to share that. And I did struggle thinking like, oh, people are going to think I'm the negative Nancy person that's like, all I talk about is the things that go wrong, or like she just wants attention or something like that. Like those thoughts went into my head, and sometimes they do even still if I'm posting something that's raw or real on social media or talking about on the podcast. But the thing is, everyone has challenges and everyone is capable of overcoming them. And it's nice to have that, I don't know, camaraderie between people and see like not everyone's life is perfect, because sometimes it's easy to just look at someone else and say, oh, they've got it all together,
For sure. And I had it like, I had a similar experience where my background, for those that don't know, is I had a period in my life where I think I've struggled with depression more of my life that I can remember than not, if I can just say it that way. And I had a period a few years ago where I literally was just suicidal, and it didn't make any sense in my mind because I was living like the dream. I was married to a beautiful wife. I had 2 beautiful kids. I had a good job. Like, I had all the things. I had a house. Like, I had everything on paper, but I was not happy.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the things that went through my head were more along the lines of my family would be better with someone else, which was a hard thing for me. And it's still honestly like something I think about sometimes, and it sucks, But at the time, I was in Texas. Yeah, I was in Texas. I had just gone through such a bad spurt of depression that I legit lost my house and was living with my sister with my family. And yet on Facebook, I don't post about negative things. I just typically don't, So it's not to hide and put fake things out there. It's just to there's enough negativity. You don't need negativity from me. So my life looked like a highlight reel, and someone commented on something that me and my wife were just so perfect. And I was like, you have no effing idea what's going on. Yeah. You just don't know. And I went and did 10 minutes later, I was sitting in our room and I was like, just no one come in here for a minute. I just want to talk. And I did a Facebook Live. And it was the first time I had openly said, you guys are seeing a highlight reel. You have no idea what's going on. And I still didn't say what was going on. That was what was going on, but no one knew that. I still didn't talk about that. But I basically just said, someone commented that we are perfect, or we have a perfect life, or whatever. And I opened up and just said, look, I'm going through depression. I've been suicidal, even though my life looks, quote, perfect. And everyone has it. Everyone has to go through it. And me doing the shaky, literally crying, tears in my eyes because I was scared to put it out there, a 5-minute Facebook Live turned into dozens of messages of people saying, me too, dude. No one is allowed to talk about that. And that was the first, I think that was the first time for me that I was okay, I can impact people. I can actually put out conversations that not everyone is willing to have. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a selfish part of it, because not only did it feel so good to have everyone reach out, because it was I let you know you're not alone, and then you turn around and let me know that I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful thing. But also the relief of having this perfect facade, I took it down myself and I said, here's what it is. And the weight off my shoulders was just such a huge, huge thing. I'm assuming you had a similar experience to that?
Extremely similar. And I got goosebumps when you just said, other people reached out and said, me too. I literally got goosebumps all over my legs and my arms. I'm oh my gosh, that's so real. But yes, opening up and putting it out there is almost like you're giving yourself permission to just stop seeming like you have it together, and it gives other people permission to be hey, this is real life. It doesn't have to be this storybook perfection all the time. It really just takes away that pressure that I think everyone feels in this day and time in social media, where it's around us daily. And you're talking about this when you lived in Texas. I'm going to ask you, because I can't remember, what year is this that you were going through?
2016 we lived in Texas. Okay. I think I really hit rock bottom in 2015, which was what led to me losing my house and having to go live in Texas. Yeah. But 2016 wasn't that great either. And it literally wasn't until the very end of the year for me where, bless my freaking sister and brother-in-law, they just let us live there. And for half the year I had some money coming in, but not a lot. But my brother-in-law floated us,
Wow.
And that was a heart, as a dude, there was a lot of pride in me that was just I'm failing at this, I'm failing at that, I'm not providing for me, I'm putting way more burden on my family, and I'm just grateful for them and letting them do it. But it took till we were in October, I think, and I saw a few different people post things that were if you want drastic change in your life, do something drastic. And if you aren't happy where you are, literally do something different, go somewhere else. And I told my wife, I was like, I think I need to leave and like go back to Phoenix, because we didn't want to. I could start in Texas and have a job there, but I didn't want to build in Texas. I wanted to build in Phoenix.
What was pulling you towards Phoenix?
This was home to us.
Okay.
Texas was forced. I was like, I don't have an option.
Okay.
And I got to hide it because I was working for a traveling sales team. Go figure, they got assigned to Houston, Texas. My sister lived in Houston, Texas. So I didn't tell anyone what was going on. I simply said, hey guys, I'm going to go down for the summer early and I'll meet you guys when you get there. So no one knew. It was so stupidly perfect that it allowed me to like really hide everything. And then come October, I finally hit a point where I was like, okay, I need to do something crazy. And I just told my wife, like, they're trying to build a team back in Phoenix. Our home base, our family feels like Phoenix is home. So I'm going to go home. And I came back, and for about 8 weeks, I was on my own out here, and I had a great team that helped me and like made it possible for me to get the family back. But then we did. And it was like, okay, like, you've proven to yourself again that you can do hard things. Don't forget that. Like, start working now. Yeah, but I mean, that was, we're going on 2 years out of it, really. Like, my time here at Rensselaer Media is essentially how long I've been good.
Yeah.
You know?
So question for you, talking about your time here being like good. And when you talk about this time being very depressed and living in Texas, I don't know what your experience is like when you are sharing your lived experience, actually. Does it feel like that was your life, or does it feel like that's still pretty memorable and like you can recall it and it feels like it was maybe almost yesterday? Because sometimes when I talk about challenging times I've been through, people are like, I would have never guessed. And sometimes I'm like, you know what? I probably couldn't either right now. It feels like it's a lifetime ago. But almost like when you're able to change your mindset and think about, okay, I've made it through this one hard thing. Now I can make it through the next hard thing, or it's easier for me to focus on like the good in today, actually.
Yeah.
You can put that further behind you. What's your experience?
I have a hard time remembering how bad it was, honestly. Like, I think I've worked very hard to forget the place I was in. And it's not that I want to just forget, because I want to remember it, because I want to be able to use it as a motivation. But I was talking to my wife about this, and like, I remember telling her when we were in Texas that like I had a few moments where I was just sitting there on our bed talking to her, saying like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to provide for us again. Like, you just have this hopeless feeling. And it, like, when you're that low, like, I really can't explain it, because today, like, if everything went away, I'll be fine. Like, I will figure it out. Like, I know that without a shadow of a doubt. But at that time, it was like, am I ever going to be able to hold a normal job? Like, because I was so depressed that I wasn't functional. And at the time, I was knocking doors on a sales team. If you're suicidal, knocking doors in the middle of a random state in the middle of nowhere is not a good place to be, because you're literally just being rejected constantly. And if you're not on your game, you're getting rejected more. And it just wasn't good for me. It was a great job. We had a great team. Like, everything about that was awesome. There was just so much internally that I had to work on that it just didn't work. Yeah. But back to your question, like, I have a hard time remembering that stuff. Like, I was trying to write in a journal, and I don't know if you've done this, but like, I was trying to write in a journal to remember these things, and I couldn't remember them. Like, have you had that?
Yes. And it's been very crazy, because I don't think if I was I was almost like strongly encouraged to journal as I was in treatment and those things. And I had to fill out like daily worksheets and stuff like that. And some of it felt very forced. And I was like, what's my emotion right now? Well, I'm angry.
Like circle the smiley face?
It was like 8 basic emotions. I think I had to determine if it was like anger, fear, pain, joy, passion, love. I always forget like the last like 1 or 2, but you had to circle. And that's when I started understanding you could feel multiple emotions at once. And it didn't just have to be I'm happy right now or I'm sad. It could be like you could feel everything on the spectrum. And there was a reason that it wasn't like it was all just randomly kind of placed on different lines. And the joy, passion, love was like what everyone wanted to get to, but they weren't next to each other. It was like always scattered, which I think was cool. And it wasn't on like in a row, like 8 different
That's
things.
what I pictured was
Yeah.
like 1 through 8 of like total frowny face to like big grinning smile.
Yeah. And I mean, it would make sense to have it that way, but I think it was cool because a lot of people do categorize things as good or bad. Like, oh, I had a bad day, or like, oh, it's bad if I ate this food, or, you know, just kind of categorizing things as that.
Yeah.
And it helped me to realize, like, okay, this is how I process things. And I was journaling quite a bit when I was in the hospital and then during my 2.5 years of treatment following that. But then I stopped journaling. And now I'm almost finished writing a book about eating disorders and helping people cope through this process. And I've had to recall a lot of different challenges in my life, and it is extremely hard to pull from things I've remembered or forgotten, and then reading excerpts from what my loved ones have written because I've asked them to help with the book, and reading some of it, I'm like, wow, I had no idea that they had this interaction with me. I don't remember it. And, you know, it's hard going, you know, thinking back to those times, or, you know, maybe you're talking to your wife and she's like, oh, I remember this time you were really struggling. And it's like, wow, I don't remember that. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you do kind of block things out, or you're, you know.
Yeah. I think there's good and bad in that. So talking about like, just to kind of back up with like your eating disorder, I always wondered, like, did you realize that you were like depressed or just off in that? Or did you realize you had an eating disorder? Like, which one came first?
Definitely the eating disorder, because, and it's so crazy because what a lot of people don't realize about eating disorders is it doesn't start about food. Like, people, like, normally if you have an eating disorder, it's because you aren't believing that you're enough already as it is. So if you are struggling with low self-confidence or things like that, you're most likely going to turn to a diet or things like that, and then it'll spiral into something, you know, very serious, like an eating disorder. But because I was a competitive athlete my whole life, I just thought I was taking care of my body and taking care of myself, and I was eating good food, and I'm using quotations here, but like, you think that you're doing things that are helping yourself, and
you were
even
rewarded.
Like
you were successful at it.
Yes, exactly. And I think anybody that's a perfectionist or wants that love back to them, you know, if you are making a lot of money in your job and your family's like, oh my gosh, like, we are so grateful for this, but maybe you hate your job, or, you know, all of these different things, they come back to you in a way where, all right, this is a good thing for me. I didn't realize, even though people were asking me, my parents or my coach on my team, you know, saying like, is something going on with you and like food or exercise? Like, do you have an eating disorder maybe? And I didn't recognize my patterns.
How long
I
have
have
they
an
been
eating
saying
disorder.
that before you finally like acknowledged it?
The first time my mom asked me, I was probably in like 6th or 7th grade.
So super early she recognized it.
But I don't think she remembers, but like, she had said like, why are you always going to the bathroom during meals? And I would like sneak food and I would put it down the toilet. I wasn't throwing up in the toilet. I wasn't bulimic at that time, but I was like sneaking the food away. And I would always leave food on my plate at the end of a meal. I don't know why I did that, but there were just certain patterns, but I just thought I was taking care of myself. So I didn't recognize that it was a pattern. And depression came much later. And that was when I was living at the hospital at Rosewood Center for Eating Disorders. And it was my first appointment with my psychiatrist or my psychologist. And Dr. Karp just said, wow, you are this like ray of sunshine. I was always like the perfect patient. I was smiling. I was encouraging everybody. I was very optimistic about my recovery. And at that time I was like, I'm going to recover. I don't care what anybody says. Like, I'm ready to do this. And my doctor was like, yeah, you're going to like crash real soon.
Yeah.
And like, the reality of going through the motions of changing your entire life around is going to hit hard, and then you're going to really struggle. And I was like pissed. I was so mad. He was like, no, this isn't going to work for you. Like, you're going to hit rock bottom again before you are able to move forward. And that was a really low place for me, because I had never really, I think I had been depressed in the past, but I had never been clinically depressed where I needed to go on medication. And those are really dark times if I'm pulling out my old journals and stuff, because my coping mechanism my whole life was turning to an addiction of exercise or some kind of food therapy, or trying to look a certain way to feel good. And when I couldn't use that as my drug, so to speak, I had no way to cope. And like the depression definitely came later. But I think looking at the science of it, depression was probably lingering before, and I was just using unhealthy coping mechanisms to deal, and that's why it occurred in that pattern, if that even makes sense.
Yeah. Had you ever even thought of that before, or was that like a bomb dropped on you and he said like, no, you're not as happy as you think you are?
I think that I knew that. I would have never categorized myself as depressed, though. Like I think I just was sad sometimes, or dang, this sucks or that sucks, but like I was still overly like an okay person, like a normal person, I would say.
Yeah.
But I would have never used the word depressed to describe myself until my doctor was like, yeah, that's going to happen for you. And then it did, like 2 weeks later.
I don't know if your personality type is quite like mine, but mine was, I was very much in denial of like how bad it was. Like I was literally like losing my house, and I was like, yeah, but I have somewhere to go, so it's not that bad. And I like, it could be worse. And like my ability to say it could be worse is like scary bad. Like I'm just, part of me is like, well, maybe I'm an optimist and I don't know it, because I'm just like, it'll be fine. It'll work out. And I have an ability to be literally like dying inside, but just be like, it's fine. Like it will work out. And like people believe me. Like that's not a, I don't know. Like I don't want to say I'm a skilled liar or faker in that, but like, people don't guess it until you really come out and say it. And like, I don't know, that was a hard thing for me, was realizing like how low I had gone. And I started thinking to myself, I'm like, dude, you can't let yourself drop anymore. Like if I was a single dude with nothing to lose, who knows where I would have been. Yeah. But like I had a family, and I was like, nope, you let's call this rock bottom. Like let's start building from here and go from there. But it's weird, and it's hard when you actually are like coming to the realization that like, not only am I at the lowest I've ever been, but like I'm probably going to still hit down here before I'm able to get better. Yeah. And that sucks. But you know, like there's work to do that's going to force you down there, but then it's going to build you back up.
Exactly. Well, and I'm kind of interested in this topic, because I shouldn't say kind of, I'm very interested in this topic of, are you an optimist or are you like a realist or what? Because you're saying, you know, it could be worse was the thing that was like scary, because you kept realizing that was your pattern that you were saying. And going through our fertility struggles and our IVF and things like that we've been starting with, I'm the realist in my relationship, and my husband is the extreme optimist, and he's just always been like that. And it seems to come extremely naturally to him, where he's like, it's going to work out. This is going to be the month. This is going to be whatever it is. And to me, I'm like, but what if it isn't? You know, like, would you say you've always been kind of like the it could be worse, like this is okay type thing? Or what's your take on that?
I think I ebb and flow.
Okay.
Because I like, me and my wife have a running joke that like only one of us can suck at a time, or only one of us can be the bad one. Because there's always like one of us is like really good and the other one's like, oh no, this sucks. I'm like, no, it's fine. Like we kind of take turns picking each other up.
And is that like, natural then? Like
kind of,
you just kind of
but
notice?
Like we've been together since we were like, we've known each other since we were 15, been dating since 16.
Wow.
And like I don't know, like, so if I'm around her, I'm definitely, sometimes I'm like the one that I'm the rock, just lean on me, it's fine, everything's good. And then there's other times where I'm like, babe, I don't know what the F to do. Like this all sucks, you know? And I kind of have both sides. I think more than not, I'm probably fall on the optimist side, but I very much consider myself a realist. Like if I'm looking at a budget, I'm like, no, let's not hope for what could be. Like let's just look at where it is right now. These are the actual facts. Like that's where my brain is. Like that's how my brain works. But when it comes to like life, I think I just reached a point where like if I had to work a job but live in my car, I was like, that's not that hard for me. Like that's not hard. Like, but in my head I was like, why do you feel the need to get that low? Yeah. And I like, to give you an example of like how weird my brain is, if you look on YouTube and you just Google my name, you'll find my channel that has me and like things that I've currently done in the last year. But then you'll see one effing video that I don't know the login for the account, but it's a video that when I went through P90X, like, how old's my son? He's 7. So I went through P90X like 7 years ago, and I went from 250 to 199.
Wow.
And I had abs for the first time in my life. And like I was 220 in the 6th grade, to give you a reference. So like always been big. I went through that, became a coach with Beachbody because everyone wanted to do what I did because my results were drastic. And I was like, well, this is easy. Like I'll get paid to coach people. And at the time I really did love it. I freaking loved fitness. I loved how good it had made me feel. And I loved that I got to like, I had other friends that in the same 90 days that I did, they also lost 50, 60 pounds. Like we all just created the system and went. But my brain went, oh, I only lost 51 pounds. That guy lost 100 pounds. Way more people are going to go to him. He had a bigger story. And I'm like, I'm competitive in having a crappier time, like a crappier low point, because in my head, I'm like, yeah, but like coming back from that is so much more impactful. But it just buries you and it makes no sense. I'm like, why not just read a book? That guy did it wrong. All right, lesson learned. But like, that's not how my brain processes, and I still struggle with that.
Well, I think that's such a crazy concept too, because I follow this account on Instagram. It's a show called The Real. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I've heard of it, but I don't know what it is.
I just love the show. So it's Lonnie Love and Tamara Jackson from Sister.
Okay.
Yeah. And 2 other gals that I don't, if you aren't familiar with the show, I just think it's entertaining. But regardless, Adrienne Bellion is one of the hosts. She used to be a cheetah girl on Disney Channel, and she used to date Rob Kardashian. But anyways, I am telling you this because Adrienne has recently opened up that she's going through fertility struggles with her husband. And for whatever reason, I felt compelled to be like, commenting on the account, and I was like, oh my gosh, me too. My husband and I have been trying for 2 years. And some random girl that follows the account too felt the need to comment on my account and was like, 2 years, like, girl, you aren't even struggling. Like, we've been trying for 7 years. And I think people tend to get so caught up in the big story of like, you think your story is big, or you think that's a challenge. Like, what about me? And some people tend to like wallow and be like, but this is worse, or that's better. And I don't know why we as people feel the need to categorize things as like worse, better, best, like, and again, that spectrum almost where it's like, oh, here's the frowny face on one end and here's the smiley face, like the gray area in the middle, or like whether somebody's been trying to have a baby for 7 years or 2 years or whatever, like it doesn't make you bad or good or whatever. It's just embracing the journey and being able to like figure out what works for you to deal with whatever it is,
Yeah. Well, and I think that like that story illustrates like another big point when you talk about why I share hard things and why you share hard things. Our goal is not to get pity. It is not to get sympathy. It is not to have you reach out and like send me thoughts and prayer. It's literally nothing like that. I put it out there because it's a weight off my shoulders and someone needs to hear it. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And I think there are some people who put out things literally wanting someone to feel bad for them. And they want to show that they're a victim and their life is harder. And like I don't know, read people's posts and you see the intention behind them. Like a lot of people share things with the intention of just proving my life harder than yours. And like, that's not either of our intention. Like, I think that's the thing to me that is, it's such a fine line to walk. And it's something that I was going to ask you. Like, I find it hard to balance that because one of the reasons I hesitated to start this was I don't want to be the freaking guy that talks about depression.
Yeah.
I want to be able to open the conversations up, give people permission to be able to know that you're not alone, but I don't want to be the guy that is like, hey, that's Hoff or that's Danny. Like, he talks about depression. I don't want that label. And you have struggled with becoming the eating disorder girl. Mm-hmm. I know, like, how have you, like, how do you position yourself when you're going about this on social media to not just become the eating disorder girl and just remain, I'm Ashley. Like, I go through whatever I want, and like, I'm just me, and that's it.
I think that I'm still trying to overcome that. And it's been a really crazy journey, because starting out when I first started sharing, okay, I'm recovered from an eating disorder, from anorexia and bulimia. And as I started Speak Up Buttercup, the business that I have and this brand that I'm still trying to evolve, I felt like, okay, the only things I share on social media need to be, quotes about loving your body and things that I'm doing related to eating disorder recovery. And when I started trying to decide if I was going to share about the IVF and the fertility struggles we've been having, I was like, but that's not my thing. My thing is eating disorders. And that's how people had known like who I was and what my message was about. And that's when it started evolving a little bit more. And for me to be giving myself permission to say, I'm not this one note person. Nobody just has one thing that they're about. And I think that we tend as just humans to be like, oh, that's so-and-so, the eating disorder person, or that's, Danny, the guy that talks about, depression or something like that. Like, we do label people in our society. When I was a cheerleader, people would be like, oh, that's Ashley, she's a Vikings cheerleader. It's like, why do we need to label people as that's the person that lost 100 pounds or whatever it might be? And when I started getting more comfortable with, I don't have to be a one-note person, I can have more than one challenge in my life. I can share things that are really amazing and don't have anything to do with loving your body or overcoming an eating disorder. And that still makes me a complete whole person that's deserving of sharing my story and having great friends and that sort of thing, if that even makes sense.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to ask you about with, like, you mentioned earlier, like, you're obviously married also. When you... It's something I've always like been curious to ask, because it's something that Brienne never knew I went through, like major depression and stuff. And like the more we look back on our high school, and I'm like, I probably effing had concussions and like all kinds of things that were untreated. I'm like, there was a lot of things that probably added to why I always felt the way that I felt. Yeah. But like, I never expressed that to her. She just knew me as like, well, Brienne knows me as happy fun me. Everyone else sees me with a straight face all the time, and like, I don't know, I think you're one of the few people that I have conversations with enough that like you actually know my personality and know that like for the most part I'm just a very laid back happy person. But everyone else just assumed like straight face, like that guy's pissed off like all the time. But that's a total side note. Anyway, my question to you was, like, when you met Parker, you had already been going through like the eating disorder stuff. You'd already gone through treatment, right? When did you like open up to him about that? Like, how do you bring up that conversation?
So that was actually a pretty crazy experience, because when Parker and I met, we were coworkers and we were doing like media and like advertising type work together. And we worked in a cubicle that were directly across from each other. So if we reached out, we could probably like high five from our desks. And I had a different boyfriend at the time, and I was always chatting with the girls that were in cubicles behind me. And so they would kind of overhear us talking or whatever. And there was one day we had a holiday coming up from work, and everybody had the day off. It was like Martin Luther King Day or President's Day or something. And Parker we were still just friends at the time. We weren't dating yet. And he was like, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? Like, just asking. That's a normal question. And I was like, oh, I'm actually going to a hospital to talk to patients about eating disorders. And he was like, well, why would you do that? And I said, well, I'm recovered from an eating disorder. And I go and do speaking events at various places. And he was like, but you're skinny. And that was his non-coached response. Yes. And looking back, like, even when he said that, I was just pissed, because I was like, people have such a common, like, people just think you have an eating disorder if you're like big or overweight or something like that. Every single kind of person can have an eating disorder. And so at that point, I really took the time to explain, like, obviously I had like 2 minutes. So I was basically just like, everyone can have an eating disorder. It's like a mental health thing. And, I went through this and that's what I'm doing on my day off. And so he kind of learned that before we started dating. And I was pretty open about it just with close friends and I guess coworkers at the time. I don't think I really shared it too much and I hadn't put it out there on social media yet. But Parker and I became good friends right from the start. And so that was great. However, once we started dating, I had to explain to him, like, you can't have a shake for dinner. I need you to sit down and have a dinner with me, because we went out on a date once and it was probably like, I don't know, date 10 or something like that. But we went to my favorite Mexican restaurant in the Valley, and Ajoel's, by the way. And we sat down and I ordered my meal and he was like, yeah, I'm just going to have one taco a la carte. And I was like, what? You can't, like, and that's really, like, literally what he ate. And he wasn't even hungry because he had a shake for dinner. And I was like, listen, if you're going to be with me, I've dated guys who are like, that's too much food, or like, you can't eat that, or like, you need to exercise. And I was like, I can't be with somebody that's going to do these things. Like, I have to sit down and have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a snack between breakfast and lunch, and a snack between lunch and dinner, and a snack before bed. Like, that was what I had to do because that was part of my recovery. But he didn't understand that. And it took a lot for him to try to understand, because I wasn't that depressed, sick-looking person anymore. To him, he knew me as how I am today, where I'm pretty open and able to talk about things. But I think people have a hard time understanding when you've been through something challenging, that just because you aren't sobbing and like you can't get out of bed because you're depressed, like if you're functioning and you can hold a conversation, people assume, but what's wrong? And they need to see the actual challenge, like right in front of them. Like, you can't get out of bed and you're a mess and like, you're crying. It doesn't have to be like that, but you do need to explain things to people in a certain way. And at the time I asked him to read a book and he didn't read it. And we almost broke up because of it. I was so upset. And I was like, I just need you to understand what I've been through. Yeah. And he was like, why can't you just tell me? And it was hard for me to put that into words because you forget, like we were talking about.
Well, and I feel like a lot of times, even though you've been through something, like it's taken me a long time to have the vocabulary to know how to actually express how I felt. Yeah. Like that's a hard thing to do. Like for most people, they don't know how to do that. Like right. We just don't have the vocabulary. And then I'll go listen to a podcast and someone else will explain why this thing happens. And I'm like, that's freaking it. Like, Brienne, please listen to this 10-minute clip. Like, yes. That was my thing. So with you and Parker, like, how have you guys learned to be better communicators through all this and like being able to really say, okay, these are my needs?
It has been a lot of the first probably 3 years of our relationship were me trying to explain to him so many times, like what I had been through, identifying emotions, which I think actually a lot of people do not know how to do. Like, it's hard to say, like 5 love languages
angry. Type of, like, know how to love them and emotions, or like, what do you mean?
So being like, I'm angry right now, or like, I'm sad, or I'm feeling like, I don't know, just like identifying a specific emotion. Because I think a lot of people, if they're pissed off and they had a rough day at work, they go home and they go for a run, or they meet their friend at the bar. And that's how a lot of people in our society cope with challenges in their life. And they don't talk it out, and they don't take the time to sit down and say, I'm angry about this particular situation. Maybe you didn't get a promotion. Maybe you had a really upsetting conversation with your mom or your in-laws or something like that. And if people don't take the time to sit down and identify that emotion, or say Parker, because he is a very positive person and things do just work out because he just has that outlook on life. He wasn't taking the time to sit down and say, I'm angry about this, or like, I'm really sad about this situation. He would just move on, and that was totally okay. But for me, I needed to talk through things and identify them, and I needed him to be willing to do that with me, because if he wasn't, I couldn't be with him. And so really it was him taking the patience, like really understanding what it took to help me through my life. And I have to do that for the rest of my life probably, so that I can stay in recovery. But sitting down, identifying how I feel, having him talk about it and have like an actual conversation around whatever situation it might be, and being okay with things not always being okay. Like,
Yeah.
and I think it was hard for him at first because he felt like he had to fix everything and he wanted to help have a solution to something. And I think that is really hard for some people. And I don't know I know we've talked about this, but like if that's a male tendency or if it is just some people are like that. But sometimes I just needed him to say, you know what? That sounds really hard right now. Like, I'm sorry you're going through that. Like, sometimes you do just need somebody to sit down and listen.
I definitely think that's a male tendency.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I'm learning, not just, especially with my conversations with my wife. And, like, same as you, like, my wife is a freaking saint for, like, all the things
amazing.
that I've, put her and my family through. And, like, they've just always been my biggest support. They just have. But we've reached a point now where we've read a few books together. Like, we've done enough where I would say the one thing that we've always been good at is communicating. Like, we've always been open, honest. We just tell each other everything, but we've not always been good at communicating. Yeah. We've been open to communicating, but not good at communicating. Mm-hmm. And I think with me, it took a long effing time to realize, like, she doesn't want me to solve her problem, because sometimes I'll see problems and I'll be like, this is not a problem. I do this, boom, we're done. And she's like, you don't listen. And I was like, no, I freaking listen. I heard the problem. This is how to solve it. And now we reached a point where it's like, I need you to tell me before this conversation starts, do you want me to just listen and let you vent? Or do you want me to come up with a solution? Because they're two very different ways that my brain's going to process what you're saying. And I use that with lots of people now. Like, when my family or friends want to vent to me, do you want to vent and me just listen? Or do you want me to help you solve it? And it's the same, like, sometimes I have times where I'm like, baby lady, I had a really hard day. I just need to tell you about it. Cool. And we just sit and listen. Yeah. But I think that's one of the hardest things for couples to learn to communicate in the beginning, especially. And I want to talk about, you mentioned that, like, you consider yourself recovered, but you'll probably have to, stay focused on these things your whole life. For people who are going through anything mental health, but especially like people who you can talk directly to with eating disorders and things like that, at what point do you actually start to consider yourself recovered? And, like, what are some of the steps that you've had to take to get to that point and, like, maintain it? Yeah.
So great question. I think starting to get to that point, I was really petrified to even say I'm recovered for a long time, like probably a year. If somebody asked me, like, where are you at in your journey? I would say I'm in recovery. Meaning because I had relapsed prior and I wasn't continuing to just move on this path where, when you see the line chart or the bar graph and it's like exponentially going up and you're like, oh, I'm doing great. Like, it was an up and down battle. And I was afraid to do that. But it's because I was toying with all of these different behaviors and things that I was doing. Like, I would go exercise for 3 hours at a time, and that wasn't a good idea for me. So I had to slowly learn, like, if I was going to go for a walk, which was something that was allowed by my registered dietitian, and this might sound crazy, but, like, I was only allowed to do a 15-minute walk 3 times a week. And being a former professional athlete and being in extreme shape, it was very upsetting for me not to be able to go exercise like I wanted.
Those were just triggers to make you want to get fully back into working out and everything?
I had to learn, like, even just lacing up my tennis shoes was a trigger if I wanted to go for a walk. I had to start going for a walk in, like, flip-flops, because if I had tennis shoes on and they were laced, I was going to start running. And I had to learn, if I'm going for a walk, I can't put on running shoes right now because it's too tempting for me to just go. And it was like going back to my first football game after going through my experiences, walking in the football stadium, smelling the hot dogs, smelling the popcorn, hearing the music that's traditionally played at football games. I had a panic attack and I sat in a disgusting bathroom floor, sobbing and shaking in a ball by myself while my best friend Chelsea waited for me by the sinks for over an hour so I could work through it because it was too much for me. I had to learn what was triggering and what was going to help me in my recovery. And I had to stay away from some of those things. I had to stop stepping on bathroom scales. I had to ask my roommates not to have the Cosmo magazines out. And I had to say, if you want them, can you please keep them in your rooms? Like those kind of things. And working through them and knowing what was challenging and what was supportive and being able to voice those and say, hey, I'm going through this hard time and I know this is helpful for me. Can you do that too? Being able to identify those things is what I really attribute to my recovery. And knowing, like, if I looked in a full-length mirror and I was going to criticize myself, I couldn't have full-length mirrors in my house. I don't have a full-length mirror in our house now. And I think I could probably manage it, but we just don't because we don't have one we like. But just really being able to look deep at what's supportive and what is harmful. Regarding mental health. And that can be anything, like watching a TV show. It can be hanging out with a coworker that at work that is constantly complaining to you about whatever life situation they're going through. I mean, it's just knowing people that are positive, things that are positive, like sticking around with those things and being able to be really in tune with what's good for you. If that makes sense. That was kind of a loaded answer that I gave you. But
it makes me think, because one of the things I've looked into is like the way 12-step recovery programs work with people. And essentially, like, first step is admit you're powerless. But essentially, like, in the end, like, the one thing that I disagree with them is they wind up identifying as like, I was an alcoholic, I will always be an alcoholic. And I'm like, I don't want to be told that. Yeah. Like, and like, I'm not an alcoholic, I don't drink. But like, I just study that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's just like bad programming. Like, I think you're programming your mind to say like the way I said, I don't want to be the guy who talks about depression. Outside of the few times, a month or whatever that I'll bring up mental health, I don't say the word depression very often anymore. Yeah. Like I literally had to remove it from my vocabulary because I was basically gifted with a conversation where I was telling someone, that I was depressed, I was going through these things, and it was a coworker, and he was like, dude, you sound like you've told that story a lot because it's pretty polished. And I was like offended, and I was like, he's right. Like, I have told that story, like, and it was just a realization to me of like, I tell people I'm depressed. They don't tell me I'm depressed. Yeah. Like, I'm the one saying I'm depressed. And I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna stop saying that. And I'm just going to start telling myself other things. Like, I still have a hard time telling myself, I'm like, I'm happy. Like, it's hard for me to look in a mirror and like do affirmations or anything like that because I'm like, it feels stupid.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time. I don't believe it presently. I have imposter syndrome as bad as literally anyone, to where every day I'm like, why am I in the position I'm in? Like, why do I get to do what I do? Why do I have the family I have? Like, I have a feeling of unworthiness to it, and like I didn't earn it. But when I stop and actually like look at it, I'm like, well, I freaking did earn it. Like, I did all of this. Like, this is me, But I have a hard time remembering that. When you were doing, like, you mentioned, little things like not having Cosmo and like things like that around. What are some of the steps that if someone's going through this and like maybe they can't get to a recovery center right now, things like that, but what are some basic things that people can do to, well, let me back up. Rather than going down that road, what are some of the ways that you've now reframed it to be more someone who like focuses on body positivity? So instead of you looking at your body as fat, what, like, I know you have ways to reframe that and ways to look at yourself. Like, can you explain that a little?
So you mentioned affirmations just a moment ago, and it felt very fake and disingenuous to say affirmations to myself. Like, I couldn't even say them out loud for a long time. But in the treatment center I was at, you had to say 2 after every meal, and you had to say them out loud. And after you would say it, like, I am smart, everyone would follow and repeat and say, yes, you are. And it was just like this almost like congregation like feel where you were just like, okay, like, this is so cheesy. And I hated it. But going into real life was a really big challenge for me because I was like, how do you go from a hospital setting where you're literally stepping on a scale in the morning and getting your vitals done and you're in your hospital gown and then you get dressed for the day, you go about your day and you're doing this stuff in a hospital and then you go home and all of a sudden you have to go back to work and school and all these other things and go on with real life and try to overcome these thoughts with, I don't know, the tools you have. And it started just with affirmations. And instead of after meals being like, oh, I'm fat, I feel fat. First of all, fat is not a feeling. It is not a feeling at all. The feelings are the 8 basic things I mentioned earlier: anger, fear, pain, joy, love, those things. Being able to identify those and then also reframing the way you think about yourself. So if you are going through something challenging, like maybe you had a bad day at work or whatever, instead of thinking like, God, this day sucks, or I suck, or I should have done this different, being like, I made it through today. And just reframing the way that you approach your thought process. So maybe parts of your day did suck really bad. Maybe you got laid off. Maybe you didn't get the promotion that I talked about earlier. All of these different things, being like, wow, I still have a good job. Or I still have a wife that loves me, or I have a place to live or a roof over my head, those kinds of things. So really just focusing on different things. And for a while, I had to do things where, I'm going to forget the terminology, but basically it was just a check-in with what you're doing. Like if you couldn't identify something good or okay about yourself, it was identifying there's a plant on that table. I am wearing purple pants right now. And it was just checking in with the things around you and being able to be like, without spiraling, I'm just going to identify what's around me. And sometimes those were the skills and tools I had to refer to, because otherwise it was going to go dark real quick.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it had to start when it was really bad. And then, it slowly got to progress to a point where I was like, you know what, I am smart. I am going to finish college. It might take me 10 years to get my bachelor's degree because I've been in treatment, but guess what? I'm going to do it. And slowly trying to recognize, like, you know what? Somebody loves me for me. I am beautiful. And being able to recognize those things. And when somebody did give me a compliment, not to, quickly say, no, I'm not, or
it's hard to learn to take compliments.
It's extremely hard, but being able to start doing that. And when you do see the things that you're capable of and the value in yourself, it becomes easier, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I like that a lot. And it's one of the things where I don't remember who I was talking to about it, but one thing that I've had to learn is trying to reframe things into gratitude, to where like I'm not ashamed to say, like, as a dude, I'm like, I struggle with body image as much or more than any freaking female. And I think it's, as someone who has always been the big dude, got to be the fit guy for like 6 months, and then is now bigger than the original, like, it's something that I struggle with a lot. And something that I think I really started listening to when, like, you had Shelby Lawson.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, she's Shelby the Yogini on Instagram. So I'm like, Yogini. But anyway, like, it was talking about reframing from the things you don't like to being like, I'm grateful for my legs because I can walk.
Yeah.
Like, it was just like, just learning to love yourself where you are now. And like, that's a big message that I needed to hear, because it's something that I struggle with. And like, I don't think you can truly make lasting changes until you learn to be okay with where you are right now and just truly acknowledge it. And then once you're in that place, then you can start making changes for the right reasons, versus like coming from a place of like, I hate this. Like, I have to do this. I'm like, I don't have to do anything. I don't. And like, I'm only making these changes because I want the end result of that. Like, I know that, like, if I take care of myself, I can take care of my family better. Like, I can do all these different things, but really, like, reframing things to come from a place of gratitude was like such a big thing for me. And it's something I'm still working on, obviously. Like, I don't think that ever stops.
Right.
Because I think the moment you stop doing things, like, one of my favorite quotes probably was said by someone way smarter earlier, but it comes from Tommy Boy. And the dad, Big Tom Callahan, at the beginning says, you're either growing or you're dying. There ain't no third direction. And for whatever reason, that freaking quote has stuck with me since I was young enough that I don't know how old I was, but I was allowed to watch Tommy Boy. That's all I remember. But I've just literally applied that to everything, whether it be my physical health, my mental health, my finances, like whatever it is. It's growing or it's dying. There is no like stagnation ever. So I'm either taking care of myself and getting better, or I'm like ignoring myself and I'm declining. That's it. So I learning to be okay with there is no end result. There's no finished product. Like I'm always going to be changing. I need to set my goals for like what do I want, so I actually kind of act accordingly. But like just learn like this is where I am now. I'm grateful for all the things I'm capable of right now, and like I have to learn to love everything in my life as it is. Yeah. Then I can start to improve things.
That's such a good way of putting it. And I think that I've had a really interesting journey this past 2 years trying to start our family. And I just felt like it's not fair because I already went through my hard thing. Like, I was like, how can I have gone through this life-threatening eating disorder that almost took my life, and now we can't have a baby, and we are spending thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars just to get tests ran, and then we, have a failed procedure, and then another one, and now we've had 5, and we're gearing up for IVF, and it's like, this isn't fair. But the interesting perspective I've had, and this is because I've done the self-development and all of these other things in personal growth, and I haven't stopped. I know that I can get through this because I've gotten through the last hard thing, and I've stopped thinking, why me? I've already had my hard thing. But it's like we are meant to keep evolving, and some people have said to me, at least, you are somebody who has a platform that's able to talk about some of these things and you can share it. And sometimes that's upsetting to me because I'm like, that doesn't make it okay. But at the same time, a lot of people go through this or other challenges that don't feel comfortable talking about them. And I'm going to talk about them. And so I don't know. It's all about perspective. And because I've done the work, I'm able to move forward and learn from it. And I know that I don't have to sit around and feel sorry for myself. And some days I do, but like, I just think that going through your hard thing, like you learn something from whatever it is, every single time something like that comes up in life. And that's the point of life. You learn and you keep growing, and you're either dying or like you're evolving, like you said. And I'm twisting those words up a little bit, but like you have to keep growing no matter what your scenario is. And sometimes it might be like debilitating, and you have to sit in that space for a while and be like, yeah, this does suck. But finding that positivity or that light, whatever it might be, and reframing your thoughts is huge. And that's how you keep going. Yeah. So
well, I want to read. I asked people to send me questions if they had them, and we've already gone longer than I thought we'd go, but I'm not mad about it at all. So I have a friend named Mitch. He said, what are some of your habits that have helped you create like solid mental health for yourself?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, admitting when I need help, which was really hard for me to do. And right now that might just be like reaching out to a friend and saying like, hey, I'm having a hard day. And I'm not saying like fix it. I'm just saying I'm having a hard day and admitting it. Other times that looks like calling my therapist and saying I need to come in for a session. And just knowing when I'm seeing red flags show up for myself is probably the best thing I do for myself now. And also just being real. And I think that helps with putting my story out there. It was really hard before being really vague about my eating disorder or fertility stuff. If we'd meet our friends out for dinner and they're like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in months. How are you? If I'm crappy, I hate being like, I'm okay. Like, I would rather just say, you know what, it's been a rough couple months. Like, we're doing IVF, like it's nice to just be real about it. So for me, it's being open and honest and just admitting when I need support.
Awesome.
Yeah.
The next question that people ask was, I think this one's from my wife. What helps you personally strengthen your self-confidence?
I don't really do affirmations that much anymore, but that's kind of what it started as, just being able to do affirmations. I probably used to do like 300 a day. And right now, I think it's just not allowing any negative self-talk. And if I do, which it does come up sometimes, I have to call myself out and reframe my thought. So like, if I'm getting ready to go to, I don't know, a pool, which we were in Flagstaff a few weeks ago, and my friends were all in like great shape and they looked so cute in their swimsuits. And I looked at my husband and we were going to the hot tub and I was like, oh, I don't look that good. And he was like, what are you saying? Like, you look awesome. Like, let's go jump in the hot tub. And I caught myself there. But like being able to reframe my mind and just say like, I look great, or focus on, I don't know, just things that I know are true. Like, I am smart. I just got my master's degree. Like, it doesn't
P.S.
have
you need to
be...
update your About Me on your website because it says I'm going to get it. You got it.
Yes,
by the way.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Yes. As of 2 months ago, I got my master's degree. Thank you. I do need to update that. But yeah, just like being open about things and saying like, I don't know. I am awesome at some things. I'm not awesome at everything, but knowing the things you're good at and just owning it and celebrating those things are really, I think, what's helped me.
Yeah, that's super cool. Is there anything that you would encourage people to like add into their daily routine to like help them, I don't know, love themselves or have better mental health? Like anything along those lines? Anything that you do?
I think cutting out any negative people, which sounds kind of bad. And again, I don't know why I just categorize that as bad, but like you have to respect yourself enough to, if you have relationships or jobs that are they're not lifting you up, let it go. Find something that celebrates the things that makes you the person you want to be. That goes for like foods you eat too. Like, and I don't know, just like such a wide variety of things, but like surround yourself with stuff that makes you happy and that lifts you up, and that's going to make you be a better person and a happier person overall. Like when I was binging and purging on food that I didn't even like, it was like, well, obviously I need to cut that out of my life. Like, why am I continuing to buy that at the grocery store if it's not going to benefit me?
Yeah.
So just identifying things that I know are going to be supportive and help me get this to the space I want to be at.
Cool. Where can people find you?
They can find me. Instagram is probably the favorite platform that I have. It's Speak Up Buttercup. Obviously one word, and then there's an underscore at the end because some darn person took the plain old Speak Up Buttercup. So Speak Up Buttercup with an underscore, and then my blog is actually speakconfident.org, and I have a blog about all different kinds of things there, and you can email me from that point and kind of find my story there.
Awesome. Well, before I ask the last question, I just want to say that I'm freaking... why am I emotional? That's not good.
Because this is episode 1. It's huge.
I just want to acknowledge you because you've been like one of my biggest supports in putting this out there. And I just want to acknowledge the work that you do. And it's inspiring to me. And I legitimately, at this point, I basically just look at you as like a big sister and a mentor. And like, that's kind of the relationship that's been built here over these last few months. And I appreciate that you're willing to put out hard things. And I know, like, you and I have had conversations that there are people that we will never know that have heard this conversation that it will affect. And there are things that you put out that you're like, I don't know why I put that out there. And then a year from now, someone random will be like, hey, thanks for that. And you'll be like, well, I had no freaking idea. Like, you didn't even like the post. But people watch, and I just know they do. And I just want to acknowledge you for being willing to be so open and vulnerable about all the things that you have been through and are going through, and continuing to just be a real but very positive light in the world, because we just need more of that.
Thank you. That means so much. And what I would like to reciprocate is that I don't think that you mentioned this, but you are the show producer on the podcast that I've been hosting. And yes. You have encouraged me to just say, have whatever guest you want and talk about whatever you want. And in my first episode, I screwed up a million times, and you were there to say, like, no, it's fine. And when I was trying to decide if I wanted to talk about going through fertility stuff, you were like, you can do it or you can't. Like, it's whatever you want to do is totally cool. And I think giving me permission to put my story out there and whatever I feel comfortable doing has been huge for me. And I think that you've been a huge part of celebrating sharing my story. And I think you're the person that asked me to be the host initially. So, I just really admire the work that you're doing, and you being willing to share your story and making this first episode happen is huge. I'm so excited for you, and I can't wait to see where this goes, because I know it's going to make a big difference to a lot of people.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that a lot. My last question is, what's something you do every day that makes you happy?
I listen to, I'm so cheesy. So I don't have Spotify because I'm really cheap, but I listen to Pandora, and I rap out to Nicki Minaj and Cardi B every day in my car.
Is that your kickstart to the day?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It usually is. Once in a while I'll switch it over to Prince, but I have a good old jam session in my car daily, and that is my medicine.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, again, I appreciate everything you do. I appreciate you being my first guest and being willing to, help me go through this, but I'm excited to see where it goes, and I'm excited to continue to watch you and all the things that you're doing as well. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And everyone, if you got any value out of this, if this resonated with you, or if you think someone that it might help or benefit in any way, please feel free to share it out. I'm available on Instagram at @thegoodhoff, on Facebook at Danny Hoefelmann, and that's harder to spell, but I think you can actually type the Goodhoff into Facebook now. But I'm available if anyone wants to talk or has things that they're going through and they just want someone to talk to. I would encourage you to talk to someone. If you don't want to talk to family, you don't want to let personal people know, reach out to one of us. We'll happily talk to you, and it's a completely non-judging way. It's just people go through hard crap, and that's real. And anyways, I appreciate you guys. So if you're listening on the podcast, I'd love it if you left a review and subscribe. So thanks, guys. We'll talk to you next time.